Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident. Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome Clay Smeltzer. Clay is a father, husband, author, speaker, teacher, high school, baseball coach, and founder of Purpose Infused Coaching. Purpose Infused Coaching's mission is to help schools, administrators, teachers, and men find and enhance their purpose and to infuse that purpose into everything they do. Clay's goal with those involved in the education system is to help them evolve into the new age of education. He does this by helping them to define their purpose so that they can effectively and efficiently provide the best learning environment. End result is for students to own themselves, love their story, and live with purpose. In regards to men specifically, Clay wants to help those men who are in life saying, "This isn't what it was supposed to be," to help men define their purpose so that they can wake up every day with excitement and energy to live the life they were meant to live. I'd like to welcome you to the show, Clay. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on and share with us some of your life journey.
Well, thank you, Dwight. I appreciate it. And just the time to kind of spend and talk and chat about the things that men need to be talking about. And really, honestly, people need to be talking about, I think is important.
Yes, it is so true. So, Clay, one of the things in my life that I am a huge proponent of is people's origin story. And I've learned that since I was younger from my father, who was a business owner, and he'd always new clients, old clients. He always wanted to know about their personal lives because he realized that was an anchor to the relationship. And part of that anchoring system is understanding people's origin story. And one of the things that's irritated me is how Marvel and Star Wars start in the middle of a series and then they pop backwards. That it does. It irritates me because they don't. It's like they discount the fact that things wouldn't be where they're at without the start, right? From you being a toddler up or from your earliest memories. So tell me your origin story. What key things from your childhood to adulthood that led you to where you're at currently?
Well, I think we always, as we go through life, we have these defining moments. I think that's really important. And I think it's really important for people, and especially as I work with men, is for those men to look back at their origin story and their start and up through that process to where they are today, is to really look at what are those defining moments in my life. So for me, I grew up in a trailer in the middle of the woods in Pennsylvania. So I didn't grow up with money. I didn't grow up with, I was the kid on the basketball team that in seventh grade who had the different shoes because my parents were like, yeah, I ain't buying those shoes. So it was, Christmas and stuff like that. We got, we got 4 or 5 presents and stuff like that because, and we got stuff that we needed: underwear, shoes, clothes, stuff like that. And then one or two things that were here that were just like out there in gifts. But so I grew up watching my dad work his butt off, he worked at a grocery store, and I still don't know how, working at Wise Markets here as a dairy manager and stuff like that. I still don't know how he provided everything he did. Cause I mean, yeah, we didn't have a whole bunch, but we still lived, and I spent most of my days, in the woods of Pennsylvania. So there's lots of stuff you can learn in the woods there. Just being creative, things like that. As I grew up and moved into high school, I got into athletics. I started playing football and baseball, and basketball in there too. But I stopped basketball after ninth grade. But I kind of looked at excelling a little bit in the football and baseball arena, and being able to look at possibly going to college to play those. So I looked at and got recruited for football and baseball to go into college. Being my size, I went for baseball, and also baseball was my passion, and catching was my passion. So I got recruited. I went to Kutztown University to play baseball, to catch, and also to get an education too on the back end of that. But really, it was about baseball. So I did that, and then in my freshman year, I ended up breaking my thumb in two places at the beginning of the season. We went to Georgia. I then caught our other catcher ended up breaking his throwing arm. So I was in the rest of the game. I didn't actually know it was broken then. I just thought it was jammed. And then I caught 10 games. My thumb was like huge. And then I went back, got x-rays. It was broken in two places. But then what I did is, because my goal was to make the major leagues, what I did is I kept playing. So we used a cast to catch. I used a cast to bat. I switched those off. I was known as the thumb guy. And so we did that. I did that for my freshman year of baseball. And then it got to the fall of that year. Then it got to the point where I couldn't catch a baseball and I couldn't swing a bat anymore. So my goal, my career, my dream, the thing that I was working for since ninth grade kind of was in. It was done. So that was kind of one of the first defining moments for me, is because something I chased and worked so hard for was now done. And it was something that was really hard for me to that was really, when we talk about purpose. Now, that's what I do now. As a men's coach, I coach men on purpose, how to reveal your purpose and how to infuse that in every single thing that you do. But lots of times in our society that we have is our purpose is in what we do. And that's what I thought. My purpose was to be I was Clay Smeltzer chasing the major leagues. Well, now I'm not. Now I'm Clay Smeltzer college student. Well, that's not that exciting. That's not as exciting as chasing the major leagues, in the game, in the grind, in doing that, and chasing after a dream that you had. But once my dream was gone and that was no longer something there, now what was it? So that was one of the first defining moments for my life, is to that. And it wasn't until I really revealed my purpose that I took ownership, because I think that's one of the things our society is missing for everybody, is ownership. I finally took ownership of the fact that I took myself out of my dream, because I was the one who continued to keep playing and with a broken thumb, instead of letting it heal and then going back to the game. I should have done that, but I had to take ownership. So the ironic piece of it is, I was trying so hard to make the majors, I took myself out of the majors, which is one of those things that's, as a man, that was shameful. And then we run these shame cycles. That was hurtful. That was all these things. Well, I did this to myself. I didn't want to take ownership and say, hey, yes, I actually did this to myself. It was somebody else's fault. It was just the circumstances' fault. No. It was mine. And later on, I took care of that. Then after that ended, I finished college at Kutztown, ended up getting married. Then a little bit later, get a teaching job. Then we had my daughter, and about a year after my daughter was there, my wife at the time was like, hey, I'm in love with you, but I love you, but I'm not in love with you, and I'm leaving you. And I was like, awesome, that's great. I was like, cool, good job, woo. So that really, and the process through there that occurred, that was a lot of time, and that was another defining moment, because that was a time where I had to go find myself. And what I did at first was I blamed, I was mad, I was just angry, but I had good people around me. You are who you associate with. And I had people who were around me that were willing to tell me the things I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear. Because I wanted cuddled. I wanted coddled. I wanted to say, hey, everything's going to be all right. And the men I had around me said, dude, it's not going to be all right. It's going to suck. And you're going to have to figure your stuff out. And I mean, I remember a phone call from my mentor. I was in a business then, and my mentor, and he basically was like, stop being a baby and pick yourself up. I mean, he put other choice words in there and other, swear words in there and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, I hung up, like it was a message, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I was so mad. It was like that point in time where I was going to drive to his house, ring the door, and just pop him in the face, as soon as he opened the door. But then 5 seconds later, I'm like, dude, you're right. I'm like, I'm blaming everybody else instead of taking ownership of myself. And again, another defining moment, because what happened there is, when, as men go through divorce, men in divorce is very hard. And a lot of people say, well, it's really hard on women, but guys don't talk about it. And it's extremely hard on men because we run a shame cycle. For me, that shame was I felt worthless as a man, as a husband, and a father. That's what I felt. I felt worthless because this other person that I wanted to build a life with basically told me that I wasn't worth fighting for. And I was like, dude, that sucks. So I internalized that. I took that on those words on as myself, and I just kept running that shame cycle of all of that. So as we go through, kind of built myself back up. I ended up meeting my sons. So my daughters from my first marriage, or middle daughters from my first marriage. My son is from now my second marriage. So I met a woman at some point in time, and even though the red flags were there, at some point in time, she validated me as a man, as a husband, and as a father. So even though there were warning signs to say, hey, you might not want to do this or continue this relationship, it might not be positive for you, I continued to go because I was trying to get her to answer the two most important questions for a man. And the first one is, am I good enough? And the second one is, do I have what it takes? And those two questions there, at some point in time, she answered them as, I am good enough to be a good man. I do have what it takes to be a good man. I am good enough to be a good father. I have what it takes to be a good father. And the same thing for as a husband. At some point in time, I was allowed, and through that marriage, we got married within 8 months. We had a kid the next 9 months. And then we were divorced after a couple months after that. So it was pretty much bang, bang, bang. And then it was over. But what our defining moment 3 there was, I realized I was trying to get somebody to answer the questions for myself instead of myself. Because you know what, the hardest thing especially for a man, is to look in the mirror and answer those questions to yourself. Am I good enough? And do I have what it takes? Because sometimes we got to sit there and be like, I don't like the answers to those questions. And we want to be big, bad heroes. We want to do that. But the problem is there lots of times we won't feel like we can. But that's where. So then from there, I kind of, again, built myself back up after a second divorce. And statistics show that most of the time, if a man gets divorced once, a likelihood he'll get married again is up. But if he gets divorced a second time, it drops down to like only 10% of men, get married after for a third time. And I was like, you know what? I believe in love. I'm a hopeless romantic. I love watching shows like,
You're a rom-com fan.
I'm a rom-com fan. When
So my brother, I do too.
Matthew McConaughey's movies, man, I love those things.
Yeah, I do too.
Chicks taking me to a chick flick. Nah, I'll take the chicks to the chick flick. I'm like, because I like that. So, and then all the reality TV shows and stuff like that are about love. Like, I love it because I don't like drama in my life. So that's really the only drama I let in my life is somebody doing it on TV. So I learned from there. And then, as time went on, after my second divorce, I had to fight. And if the U.S. is not a great place for men in the court system when it comes to families, and so I ended up having to work 2 jobs as a teacher, and then I worked at a bar till late in the night. Then I go teach again, all that kind of stuff. I was finishing up my master's degree to try to bump my pay up there so I could pay for my kids and everything. I was going through a divorce. I was going through a custody battle, not only with my son, but with my daughter as well. As a man walking into the courtroom for custody, because I have, a penis between my legs, I got to fight for every right that I have, which is not right. That is also a system that has to change. And then when we look at finances, because I had kids from different marriages, they didn't calculate into each other. So I had my kids partial, and that's what I was fighting for 50-50. I have that now, but I was also fighting the custody payments as well, or the child support payments as well, which at that point in time, because of all of the money I was paying in child support and I had my kids, I was only living about $972 a month. So I was trying to figure out what was going on. How do I put food on the table for my kids? How do I do this? And it was just, I lived in survival. But the problem is I'm good at survival. You put me in a position, I'm good at it. And I'm good at fighting. But then as we got out of all those things, I met my wife that I'm married to now. I met her. We developed this relationship. I got back out of that debt 50-50 custody, child support, all that kind of stuff, lower to where it's actually now you can afford it. The So all of that stuff in place, life was going good. So here comes moment number 4. I'm sitting on my couch right over here in the basement watching Game of Thrones, and I have a complete panic attack over a scene in Game of Thrones. And so I'm sitting there as a man, my wife's sleeping next to. I don't know how she slept through Game of Thrones, but she was sleeping. And I don't know if you've ever watched it before, but the whole door scene, there was a bunch of ice zombies running through this tree, and this one pixie stayed behind to try to stall them. And basically, she was surrounded by them. And internally, that's what I felt. I felt trapped just like her, knowing that if I didn't do something for my life, I was going to be just like her, and dead. And that's not a good feeling, especially as my wife's sitting there next to me. I'm sweaty. I feel like I'm going to throw up or have diarrhea, all that kind of stuff that comes along with anxiety that I have dealt with for a lot of years. But it just was that full blown panic attack and going, dude, this is not. So when we talked earlier in the show, this isn't what it was supposed to be. That's what I was talking about, because this wasn't my life was supposed to be. If you looked at the picture of my life from the outside, it looked awesome. You'd be like, dude, why are you having a panic attack? Everything looks great. But what it looks like on the outside doesn't matter. We see all these famous people, over and over and over again, have money, have fame, have fortune, have all these things, and are miserable. But why? Because they didn't take care of the internal. And that's kind of where I was too. So for me, that was the 4th one to really say, hey, listen, you need to do something different with your life. And I think men change for 2 reasons. One, because there's something so great out in front of you. You're like, all right, I'm going to change, but it has to be like something way great. But most men change because the shit hits the fan, and part of my French, but it hits the fan and you're like, I have to change. And I think that's for me, that's where I was at. Called a midlife crisis. That's what it was. I was 35 years old, sitting there going, this is not what my life should have been like. And the only person who had any opportunity to change it was me, because ultimately I put myself there. That was mine. And again, my purpose, and hold on before I say that, is then I went through the series to find out who Clay Smeltzer was. It went deep, it went dark, it went a lot of places I didn't want to go. But in order for me to have the passion that I have now and to help men the way I do in the US, in North America, around the world, the reason why I do what I do now and I have the passion for it now and help men that way is because I went through the crap. It's not just me reading some book. What I take men through is what I went through, and it stinks. It's not fun. But I had to do it in order to get to my purpose, which is to own myself, love my story, and live with purpose every single day. So that's kind of my origin story up to today where we're talking. And my goal here today with you is just leave it on the field, man. And
Wow.
because here's one of the things too that I think all your listeners and everybody that's listened to this is, I want you to understand that you might not get tomorrow. I might not get those stairs right there. And one thing that really affected me in that whole journey was death. And I would have a lot of panic around death. I'd have a lot of anxiety around death, but I was so afraid of it. I lived in fear of not doing anything about it. But what I understand now, knowing my purpose, is I don't know when my time's up. We could get done this. I could fall down those stairs over there, break my neck, and be done. But what I'm going to do with you, Dwight, and all your listeners is I'm going to leave it on the field right now, because that's what my dad taught me. That's one of those lessons I learned from my dad, is to leave it all on the field. So that's what I'm going to do here with you. So that's my origin story.
Wow, I love your origin story. I ran out of room on my page where in between questions, I leave room for notes. Like, brother, I'm proud of you because you've
Well,
been
thank
through
you.
a journey that many will never understand. And
Mhm.
honestly, I hope a lot don't, to be
Yeah,
honest, because
I agree with
as a
you.
single parent going through divorce,
Yeah,
my triggers as I was listening to you were going like a roller coaster.
yeah,
And that's not a bad thing. It's a good, people have to understand it's okay to feel emotions.
yep,
What's not okay is for you to live in those emotions that
yep,
are not serving you. And the work involved with people like yourself that have gone through it, we're the best teachers.
Hmm.
because we're teaching from experience. Like you said, we're not learning from a book.
Yeah.
We've learned through experience, the school of hard knocks. We've consistently worked on our 6 inches between our ears, because you talk right about living in a trailer, hanging out outside, typical childhood, right?
Hmm.
Hopefully, there's obviously ups and downs in our lives. And one of the things that you brought up was about your dad, right? He
Hmm.
worked at a grocery store. You weren't sure how he paid for life, how he
Yeah.
supported you.
I had
You
no
know what the
idea.
biggest problem that we have in our society is? Parents hide things from their kids. And I've heard it
Hmm.
time and time again as a
Yeah.
finance dude. Don't I'll educate my clients and coach, and I privately coach people how to work on their 6 inches. And I tell them they need to be more vulnerable with what they share with their significant other,
Hmm.
what they share with their kids, within reason, obviously. I teach
Hmm.
them how to do it age appropriate. That's another problem.
Yeah.
People don't get age appropriateness and how kids' brains are developed. And they take a while to be able to handle stuff. And prime example is the parent groups that exist in North America for rating music, movies, games. It's a
Hmm.
it's a scientific process of how our brain develops and how it can internalize and deal with things. And some of our trauma as children is because of the fact we're not our families, as we talked outside of the podcast, they don't necessarily do the right things for us. They
Yeah.
parent us nowadays. Kids are in the past. Kids were parented by TV. Now it's TV, tablets, computers,
Yeah.
gaming machines. Oh, leave me alone. Go play video games.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Because why do parents do that? Well, I believe parents do that because they have their own trauma from their own childhood, and
Hmm.
it's a generational process. So what
Yeah.
you went through and how you developed yourself, even your stubbornness for, when you hurt your hand and continuing to play
Yeah.
baseball, it's still, some of that is a good trait. Some of
Correct.
it wasn't. And then your
Correct.
realization of it and you correcting it and figuring it out and taking ownership is
Yeah.
why I admire you. Right? I
Well,
do.
thank
I
you.
admire you. That is amazing. And you're a very good storyteller, by the way.
Well,
My
thank you.
listeners,
Appreciate
my listeners, I
that.
would highly check out, just as a side note, to help out my friend, because I appreciate people that respect me and refer me. Check out Clay's podcast. I listened to his latest episode that was released. I listened to it late last night. It's really decent. You'll get a lot of value from him.
Mhm.
So we're going to go on so I can cover, because there's so much I want to learn from you. I know one of your goals is to bring men together to
Yeah.
rebuild masculinity with heart and purpose. What do you believe caused the need for men's masculinity needing to be rebuilt?
Just society. When the change in society, the change in our culture, because when we look at it, and we talked about parenting there, so I'll get into a tiny bit of what I believe is we've lost that family unit, but we've as men, and I think it's a dichotomy. So I mean, I coach men, so that's what I talk, but I think the same thing has happened with women as well, and femininity. So when I say masculinity, femininity, when I talk about what I'm going to tell here and kind of give that story of how it transitioned, I mean for both. But I specifically deal with men, so we're talking about masculinity. Um, but when we look at history, go back 1900 back, our goal kind of for the day, especially in a majority of the places around the world, was to wake up and not die. That was it. So when we look at it, we had to take ownership. We had to be in a position of survival, which our brains operate in that method. So when you look at conscious and subconscious, subconsciously, our brain works in survival. So it says, hey, what's the threat? Then take care of the threat, things like that, or maneuver, all that kind of stuff that comes along. So when we also talk about anxiety, we were in an anxiety ridden state all the time, and we had to use that. So why is it mental health up for men? Is because we're not tapped into our primal need. Our society doesn't allow us to be what we were designed really to do. And if we look at 1900 back, we had to wake up, we had to cultivate the land, we had to go hunt, we had to protect our lands. It was a different society. And then when you go back through the ages, it was even worse as you go back through the ages. So when we look at it, men have played that role of provider protector in a way that had to beat things up, kill things, harvest things, do those things. That's honest. That's what we're designed to do. I mean, there's a lot of different thoughts around masculinity, femininity, all that. Listen, we were designed. And again, that goes back to my spiritual beliefs, stuff like that too. I believe that there's something else out there. But when I say we were designed, our bodies, everything that the way we think in our DNA was designed to provide and protect in a physical manner. So that's what we have done up until 1900. But then after 1900, we get into the Industrial Revolution, we get into then TV, then we get into computers, and then we get into today. So what society was 1900 back was you had about 90 to 95% survival. That's what you did throughout the day. That left 10 to 5% pleasure filled. Again, our brains work survival. But now let's take our world today. We are at 90 to 95% pleasure filled world and only 5 to 10% survival world. So when we look at rebuild that masculinity, when we're looking at that, we have to rebuild it, because our masculinity and what we were designed to do in our head and in our brain isn't matching up with the reality of the world we live in. So what we have to do is we have to rebuild and say, hey, what does that actually look like in today's world? Because our subconscious and our DNA is running something that went back 1900 back. So when we talk about bringing men together to do that, it's about having those conversations. Hey, listen, our brain worked this way, but we live in a world that's this. Well, what does that look like for you? And then you get to masculinity. Well, what is masculinity? I mean, you got literally millions of different, what masculinity is. This person will tell you there's tons of men's groups out there that help with you. Some of it is spiritual, some of it's non-spiritual based, some of it talks about that big macho man, like that type of man. And for me, when we look at bringing men together to rebuild masculinity with heart and purpose, that comes back to you. Again, you'll probably hear me say this a whole bunch. Everything comes back to you. So for you, Dwight, what's masculinity for you? How does it show up in your world for you? What's it look like? How's that pertain to just you yourself? How's it pertain to you and your kids? How's it pertain to you and providing and protecting? What does it look like for you? Because what it looks like for you, Dwight, is different than what it looks like for me. But if you don't do the work to know what that looks like, you can't live by it. We will run operations based upon what we were told. So I'm going to go back to the 80s and 90s. 80s and 90s went to the macho man. I mean, you can even think about Macho Man, Randy Savage, all that kind of stuff. It was drink more beer, link up or hook up with more girls, and lift more weights. That's what society told us. That's what movies told us. That's what magazines told us. That's what athletes told us. That's what all those different things they told us. That's what that peer pressure told us. So that's how I tried to live. I tried to live by somebody else's means of what they told me to live by instead of living by my own means. Well, what did that get me? Well, that get me at 35 years old, sitting on my couch, like I told you before, having a panic attack going, this is not what my life was supposed to be. Why? Because I was doing everything else for everybody else instead of doing for myself first. And if my cup isn't full and overflowing, I can't give. I can't do that. If I can't lead, and one of the biggest things of that day, I started probably the biggest shame cycle I started. And again, guys don't talk about shame. Why? Because nobody talked about it with us. I mean, I'm 40 years old. Nobody talked about shame for me. Nobody talked about their feelings. Don't cry, get back up, man up, all that kind of stuff. All those different things. That's what I was taught. Now, I utilized some of that in a good way, but if we go over to the extreme, anything extreme isn't very good for you. And that could be good and bad things. But the reason why a big shame cycle started, because I looked at my wife sleeping next to me, and I looked at myself, and I tried to picture myself, out externally of myself, and said, if I can't take care of myself, how am I going to provide and protect for my wife and my kids? So go back to our internal nature. My nature as a man is to provide and protect. I couldn't do it for myself. How was I going to do it for my kids? How's it going to do it for my wife? Oh man, it still gets me, emotional now, because I don't want men to feel that, and that's why I do what I do. That's why I have the passion that I have. That's why I built the brotherhood, the Purpose Infused Men's Brotherhood. That's why I have the Purpose Revealer program, because I want you to wake up every single day, know why you're here. I started saying this the other day, because I started thinking about this the other day. Somebody asking me about, well, purpose, if you didn't know, like, I forget what the question was. It was great. But basically, like, I answered and said, listen, like, I can't answer this question because I know what my purpose is and why I'm here on this earth. And for me to wake up during the day and not do that, I can't picture that. Like, I just can't, like, so go back to I think it was before we started talking, you said about one of the guys in one of your groups, you said, well, I just keep having bad days. No, that's your choice. I can't have a bad day because when I wake up, I know why I'm here and I have another opportunity to be that. So for me to say at the end of the day, hey, this was a bad day, I'm like, I have no clue how that could happen. Like, I don't know how that could happen anymore. But in the past, I used to live that every day. I used to dread my 40-minute drive to school. And the closer I got to school, because I'm a 7th grade math teacher, the closer I got to school, the more anxiety I felt. I literally drive to work, make myself sick driving to work because I'm like, I can't stand this. And it wasn't because of the kids. It wasn't because I didn't like what I was doing. It was because of me, period. It was the thoughts that I had about me because I had no reason or purpose of why I was going there. Besides, it was money. It paid bills. and to me, that's just a crappy way to think. If I'm going to do something, invest my time, invest my energy, I want to know why I'm doing it. There has to be a purpose behind it. So I don't know what the question was. I totally forget what question you asked, but I hope it answered it.
It did. It doesn't matter, brother. I so enjoy this conversation, but you talk a lot about how can we measure up for our families, for others around us, and we can't measure up for ourselves. And, I talk about that, coach about it. It's in my book. I talk about quiet desperation. I spent a lot of years putting up a facade to others, going to bed at night and being in quiet desperation because I didn't know what to do. I had some of the tools already. I knew I had read books and I'd done all this stuff, but reading doesn't make you knowledgeable. Reading doesn't give you necessarily the secret sauce. Just like me standing in a church doesn't make me a good person. Me standing in a garage doesn't make me a car, right? You have to put in the work, and you've obviously done that, and you're helping others. I do the same thing though. You brought up about our conversation about my friend saying, bad days, and I conditioned him to think about bad moments instead and how to level up out of it. But the biggest thing is people forget about gratitude.
Yeah.
Wake up in the morning. I thank God for another day. I thank God for giving me another shot, another opportunity to be the best version of myself. Because as we talked about prior, we don't know what's going to happen 10 minutes from now. You could trip on the stairs and break your neck. I could get off this call, and people don't appreciate that 1 minute from now is the future. And every minute after that's the future. And how are you living the present minute, right? So how are you living your present minute? And I talk to people and I coach them. I recently did a video log about it, about people tripping over the future because they're so stuck and living in the depression of the past. So they live in a depressive state, and they're once in a while thinking about the future, and those two, depression and anxiety, cross over, but they're so stuck in living in the past and in a depressive state that the future's passing them, keeps on going, that they trip over the things that could help them get out of that depressive state because their 6 inches isn't right. They're living in quiet desperation. And the biggest key thing, as you mentioned that earlier, is our associations. And associations to me are so much more than just the people you know. It's how do you associate with what allow your kids to watch on television, what you were allowed to watch on television, what you as an adult watch on television. When people are in a depressive state or quiet desperation, like I call it, what are they normally doing? They're watching movies, listening to TV shows, radio, podcasts, whatever, that are enhancing their mood,
Correct.
not breaking their mood and
Correct.
breaking that cycle. So I teach people that you need to, I will ask people, my clients, the people I coach, what do you listen to? What do you normally do? Tell me your routines. I want to know your origin and how you got to this point. And then what have you
Hmm.
done in your past? And I try to help them selectively understand why they're broken without
Hmm.
them feeling like they're broken, right?
Yeah.
Because some people, it can put them into more trauma
Yep.
by somebody being critical with them so quickly. But I really like what you had to said. Masculinity is different for all of us. Absolutely.
Hmm.
I'm not the same person as you. My definition of an application of different processes in my life as a
Yeah.
man, there's similarities, but there's lots of differences.
Correct.
You know, another shot, another day. I wrote that down
Hmm.
because I say those words and I wake up. Thank you for
Yeah.
letting me have another shot, another day. Because if I don't start my day off in gratitude, sometimes I
Yep.
wake up, something's happened and it's reactive. And
Correct.
then I just chase on my day. And later on in the day, I wonder why I'm in a funk, right?
Yeah.
What did you talk about?
And
What's our
yeah,
subconscious mind about? You said
it's
it.
about survival.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, all of a sudden my subconscious is taken over because I haven't fed my conscious mind that reminder of having
Hmm.
gratitude for having a home, having food, waking up, getting another shot, welcoming something bigger in my life than me,
Hmm.
which I welcome God into my day every day. And for my listeners that know me very well, I have agnostic, atheist,
Hmm.
people that worship nature. I'm not here to judge anybody.
Yep.
I'm here to say, though, that you need to work on your 6 inches between your ears and associate with great people like Clay or myself that can help you level up, that can
Agreed.
help you hold accountable to the fact that the only person that can control your path in life is you, and quit pointing your fingers at other people, right?
Stop making excuses. And
Yeah.
man, listen, I was the biggest excuse maker. And the thing is like, there's John Maxwell always says and that there are 2 days when you're born, one where you actually came out of your mom's womb, and the second day is when you take complete and utter ownership of every single thing that you've done in your life. And everybody
Love
that's
that.
listening to this, you here, myself here, you are exactly. And I didn't believe this. I tried to fight this when I heard this, when I read this in John Maxwell's book, and I'm like, you know what? No, this doesn't apply. But here's the truth: you are exactly where you are at today, every single aspect of your life, because of you. Period. And we can, and I get people say, but Clay, you don't understand. I'm like, I know. I don't need to, I don't understand. And guess what? I don't need to. You do. You need to understand. I don't have to understand
100%.
your story. You know why? Because it isn't my story. It's your story. So you got to understand your story, and you got to know that everything that you did, it was in a response. We got this from one of our brothers from the West Coast said this: I plus no wait, I plus R equals O, which is no wait, dang it, I messed it up. I forget it now.
That's okay.
But it's your the event. Oh, that's what it is. E plus R equals O. The event plus your response equals the outcome. And you may not be able to control the event, but you definitely control your response. And there's lots of things, just like saying, hey, I couldn't help that, you know, my first wife said she was done. No, but my response to it, I could. And that's just like, I had a great conversation the other day with one of my clients. It was about fear. And he said, and just like there's been a lot of hurt in relationships for me that I went through as a man. And most of the time, as again, I'm divorced twice. Usually men do not get married a third time because they don't want to deal with the pain. And lots of times you'll see guys who are single for their whole life because they've been through some type of pain. They don't ever want to feel it again. But the problem is they're living in fear. And that my client asked me, he's like, well, do you fear that your wife will leave you too? And I said, yes, but I don't believe it will happen. There's a difference. Do I fear it? There is fear there, but I don't allow it to actually do that, because here's the fear part. I have no control over what she decides to do. Totally up to her. She might wake up one day and be like, you know what? I'm just annoyed with you. I'm done. Cool. Like, that's what she could literally try it. But I don't base my life, my decisions based on that. I based on what the reality of how we interact with each other are. And that's why we build that relationship. That's why we built a great relationship. That's why I just love being with my wife just because of her. This is the first marriage I've been in that there wasn't some other type of reason why I've married her other than, hey, I just love being with you. And that's a beautiful thing to me because that's all I've always wanted. And that's what I have now. But I've worked my butt off to make sure that I'm building relationships like that. But and I told him too, is like, but that's with any relationship, there could be a great buddy of mine. And one day he may be like, I just don't want to be your buddy anymore. There's fear in losing some type of relationship and loss. And there's that fear. But if I work based upon that fear, then I'm living in a scarcity mindset instead of an abundance mindset. And that doesn't give me any results. There's two processes that living things go through. One is growth and the opposite. And the only two things that happen is growth or decay. If I'm not growing, I'm decaying, and I just don't ever want to decay in any area of my life. I always want to get better because if I stop growing in any area, that's relationships. I work into four foundations. The four foundations are your body, your mind, your bonds, and your bills. If I don't grow in each one of those areas, I'm decaying in one of those areas. I'm decaying in it, period. So if I don't keep working my body, putting good things in my body and working my body's going to decay. It's just how it's going to happen. So same thing with your mind, same thing with the relationships that you have, the bonds and your bills, your finances and stuff. If you don't grow it, it's decaying, period.
Absolutely. I love that. So I wanted to also talk to you about something that I caught. I don't know if I grabbed it off your site or if it was off of one of your social media, but you stated, I want all men to live from their heart and their
Mm-hmm.
truest self, not from what society, others, and the world said we should be. I love the
Yeah.
statement, and I call society the committee of they, as they are always
Yeah.
telling us from childhood up how to live as a man.
Oh yeah.
Examples such as boys shouldn't cry, don't show your emotions, suck it up, be a man. Men are
Yeah.
the breadwinners and responsible for taking care of the house, family, etc. And a bunch of
Yeah.
other garbage that we've been fed our whole lives and still today. I know this idea has been around for centuries that men should not show vulnerability. What do you believe is the best way for a man to learn how to be vulnerable?
Know themselves is go look in the mirror, period. The mirror is the great equalizer for men and women, for anybody. Because guess what? The only person that knows every single thing about yourself is in that mirror. And I challenge every single man and actually anybody, men or women who listen to anybody. I challenge you to go look in the mirror. I was challenged at this at 28 years old. I couldn't do it. I thought actually when the guy I respected, he challenged me to this. I laughed in my head, not out loud because I didn't want to be disrespectful, but I'm like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever like. This is the dumbest thing ever. And then 2 days later, I went and tried it, and I still see the sink. I could still see the mirror. It was in my buddy's house. I was renting a room from, and I still remember the tears just dropping into the sink because I couldn't. And the challenge was, and he said, Clay, right now you need to go look in the mirror, look yourself square in the eyes, and tell yourself you love you, and mean it. And I was like, that was the dumbest thing I ever heard. I love you. Okay, cool. And then I went to do it, and I couldn't. 6 months. It took me 6 months and 5 days to get to the point where I could look now I tried it throughout there, but it took me 6 months and 5 days so I could look in the mirror and be like, I love you, and actually mean it and believe it. There's a difference between looking in your mirror and be like, I love you, ha, ha, and joking around about it, but you actually meaning it, because that man that stared back at me in the mirror, I didn't like that guy. And that was a point in time in my life where I thought I was doing good. That was a point. It was after my first divorce, and I felt like I built myself out. But I looked in that guy's eyes, and I was like, oh, I don't like who you are, man. I don't like this. And it's very uncomfortable. But from that day till now, I can still look in the mirror. Like when I say I love you, like I'm looking at myself in the video here, and I'm looking in my eyes and saying I love you because I mean it. Now there's things that as I went through, there's things that I didn't like, some of the decisions I've made. I didn't like, but it doesn't mean I don't love myself. It still means, hey, I got to work on myself, and I know that. But for me, how do people really get to that point of, it's doing that and taking full, complete ownership of everything you've done, is realizing I am where I'm at because of my choices, period. Not somebody else's, not the excuse making crap you hear all over the place. Like, oh, well, it's this person's fault or this person's fault, or the media made me do it, or this person, or no. It's yours. You are the person who controls your actions, period. And it's your fault. It's your choice of what you did. Now you can do two things. You can get better because of it, or you can get worse. It's totally up to you. Some people say, well, there's a third, nothing can happen, but that's getting worse because staying in a state of stagnant is worse. I mean, to me, it might not be for everybody, but to me, if I'm stagnant, that's worse. That's on the worst side because I didn't get any better.
Our minds need to be stimulated. Our minds were never designed to be stagnant. And I love that you brought that up. And since you brought that up, I was going to ask something else, but actually I'd like to discuss that some. Stagnancy happens because we in society are raised as young people to get married, have kids, right? 2.1 kids, 2 kids and a dog or a cat, and have a white picket fence, go to work, go home, get paid. And that stops our brain from being stimulated. We have high expectations at our careers, our businesses. We live a facade. We live a different life at home. And our home life may not be in the greatest state. We're in disarray. We're in disarray personally. That culminates, and we bring that into our jobs. We bring that into our decision processes. And we're not taught how to walk tall. And after this, I'll have to share something with you. It's part of one of the workshops I'm working on, and it's a thing that I put together, and it's 2 slides, and it goes through points about how we need to learn how to walk tall in life. And how we become better decision makers when we are not fearful of loving ourselves. We're not fearful of the bills, whether we have money or not. We can learn to live in even a debt state and be happy knowing we're controlling that debt state, that we're paying it down, that we've been given purpose, that we're not alone, and that we have support. But none of that alone support works for anybody if they can't have ownership. And you talked about looking in the mirror. Dude, I was there, brother. I know what you're talking about. Not liking who I was and letting the committee of they constantly control how I should feel during marriage, during separation, during divorce. They're constantly saying, oh, how can you do that yourself? You need some support. You know, it may have been true. Their intention or their comment may have had some validity. Their presentation or the fact of giving me solutions wasn't the greatest, or if they gave me solutions at all. And it basically comes to a point where we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We have to look for the right things to change ourselves, and being honest to ourselves as a guy, especially, and girls, I know you have this challenge too. Dad is single dad, 4 daughters and 1 boy. I went through it all, the emotional journey, and being vulnerable to my kids helped me be vulnerable to myself and all the mistakes. And I stopped using that word too. Mistakes I talk about it, but I don't use it in my mental mind state. Everything for me is, what lesson did that screw up, right? What lesson did that screw up, or that improper way of dealing with things that I just did? Remember wordsmithing. What did I do to change what can I do to change? What did I do wrong? And then that continued wisdom helps me be a better person, a better man, a better provider to others, and a better servant. My whole goal in life is to be a servant. So in order to serve others, I have to serve me, just like you said, first. And 6 months, 5 days to look in the mirror, dude, at least you're courageous enough to have counted the time. I couldn't even tell you how long it took me, but I went through that journey, and I appreciate your vulnerability. And I hope the listeners understand that, nothing comes easy and nothing is cheap in our life. And I don't mean financially. I mean, cheap is a cost of what you're going to go through in a roller coaster of emotions as you learn to accept the trauma that you could have caused yourself that you didn't realize, or that your committee of their friends, family, and everybody injected into your life has caused you to be where you're at. And taking ownership is the biggest weakness we have.
Yeah,
taking ownership,
absolutely.
admitting that we're flawed human beings, we're never perfect, and we can strive to be better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And never sit in judgment of other
Correct.
people's
Yeah.
stories. You talked about earlier, you talked about, you know, interpretation of your story. You mentioned as well that other people, you don't need to know their story
Yeah.
necessarily
Yep.
because their interpretation of their story is controlled by the culmination of their origin up to
Yep.
where they're at. They need to understand that their story is their story. They can tell me their story. I can try to interpret it, but I still can't climb into their six
Correct.
inches and
Yeah.
find out
Yep.
exactly where they're broken. All I can do is give them tools to have realization, just like you,
Yeah.
to go through that realization process. And you can probably concur. You don't know how long it's going to be. Somebody you're coaching or somebody you're helping
Yeah.
could take 3 months and 5 days.
Yep.
Not take, it could be 3 weeks. Some
Could
people
be
are hurting.
3 years. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my
It all
gosh.
depends. Yeah.
Yes. So I really appreciate that what you said.
Well, thank you. And I think one of the things too is what you just said there is important for people to understand. The process to find you, the process to reveal why you are here, it's not the same for everybody. It's a different. In my Purpose Revealer program, I walk you through exactly what I did. So I have a process to go through there, but the things that come up in between day one, and I usually say, within at least 90 days, we can get you to have your purpose defined and written down. So you're like, dang, that's me. That's why I make every single decision. It usually comes down to 2 to 3 things and qualities and characteristics about you. That's what it really comes down to. But we got to go, so many people, and I think this is part of the society too. When we jump back to that question of masculinity, masculinity has stayed on the surface for so long, for thousands and thousands of years. Provide, protect. The more people we could beat up, we could kill. We could get, when we could beat up and kill more things or people, we could gain more land, more women to procreate with, and more money. It gave us status. Hey, I could go fight all this stuff. It gave me status. Now we don't have that society anymore, but we want to make sure that we still have those pieces that are in play. And what we have to do is we have to make sure, like, I'm utilizing me effectively in that manner so that I can live the life that I actually really want to live, not somebody else or what they said. Hey, you should live this. I mean, just like, you hear Gary Vee say all the time, like, stop living by your parents' means. Stop listening to your parents, because, well, I mean, I didn't listen to my parents because they told me not to listen to them, because they say, hey, we're going to teach you things, but ultimately it's yours. And I'm like, cool, because it's my life. You know what I mean? But so many kids do that. Well, I got into, why are you a lawyer? Because my parents wanted me to be. Okay, well, do you actually like it? Like, it's all right. It pays the bills. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, are you sure it actually pays the right bills? Because, yeah, sure, it might pay the bills this way, but the real bill is the one that's in here.
Oh yeah,
Is it paying that bill?
100%. We too many times in our lives live for others and forget that we're all creatures, unique fingerprints. We all have a
Mhm.
process of having our own story and helping others, and it gets squashed because of the committee of they has
Yeah.
taught us that we should be like our parents. Oh, you look at
Yeah.
that kid, they're terrible, it's their parents' fault. Or there, look at that adult, it's because of the way they're
Mhm.
growing up. Some of that is a reality,
Yeah.
but you still can take ownership. You can still
Correct.
push yourself back and into a point of ownership. So what are your thoughts on how we can start actually teaching our children outside of the education system on how to live life on purpose and not by accident, so they are more productive, happy adults?
Well, I think it first starts with the parents doing it for themselves. That's the real
Absolutely.
key, because we don't have that. Um, I would say my generation didn't. I heard somebody say this the other day. Our generation, probably for the last 20 to 30 years, really hasn't gone through anything. It really hasn't gone through any real struggles. I mean, we had 9/11 in there and stuff like that, but the majority, we didn't have something like World War II or anything like that. Like, we didn't have real hard struggle um, to go through. It's been kind of easy. it's been kind of fluid. And I think one of the things that parents need to do is for you are the example for your kids. When you take care of yourself and you own your own self instead of make excuses for everything. And as a teacher, I see this all the time. So when I get kids and stuff like that, and a parent, you're like, okay, I made the connection there. Okay, these kids talk just like the parents, because why? That's the environment that you're in. But as a parent, when we take ownership of ourselves, our kids will take ownership of them because they see that happening. One of the things I do, and I think this is one of the things we've gotten away with. Now I'm going to switch over to boys, especially becoming into men. So I'm going to look at, how can a father, what's a father's role in order to do that? Or if a boy doesn't have a father, what's another man's role to be able to do that? And I believe there's initiation process that has to occur for any boy to step into a man, take ownership of their own life. Because if not, if not, you see it so many times that I was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the guys was a construction owner, and he said, well, this guy showed up 3 hours late. I reamed him out, and his mom called me later that night and said, you shouldn't talk to Johnny that much. You hurt his feelings. And he's like, he didn't show up. Maybe you should make your 24-year-old son actually, like, not call him because your son's 24-year-old. He can take care of himself. Maybe you should show up on time, And he's like, well, she got mad at me for that too. And I'm like, dude, that's crazy. Like, you're 24-year-old supposed to be a man, but you're actually an adult boy having your mommy call in because you didn't show up to work on time. Like, there's no ownership. There's no nothing on that. And especially there's so many guys my age, I still see act the same way they probably did in high school, or actually acted in high school. And it's like,
They're wearing their high school ring or their varsity jacket.
Yeah. You're still the same boy that you were here. And it goes for women too. Again, all these dichotomy of men and women, it happens in women too. But
of course, yeah.
With men, it goes but for me, that transition for my son, it wasn't important before I developed myself. And I look back at my life and how did my dad transition me too? Because one of the things I talk about too is there's that patriarch in the family. And for me, I'm the patriarch in my family. Like, my dad is part of our family, but it's not everybody looks to him. In my family, they look to me. So I have done the work for my dad for two things. One, I've done the work to step away from my dad and my mom to say, I'm my own man. And two, I have done the work for my dad to give me his blessing, his hand, and say, son, I now see you as your own. And I think that's one of the things that we've got now, that initiation process with boys into men, because we'll go back to the 1900 back, boys went with their dads to what they did. They went to the fields, they went to their work, they went to they went to the shops, they did these trades. They saw their dad work. They saw their dad deal with people. They saw all these interactions that their dad did with them for years on end. And most of the time, what you had is that son usually took over the family business or whatever it was that they did, or that trade. And so boys saw their dads in that form, which is a way for dads to transition them into being their own man and accepting. It also broke away from the mom, because the mom is a provider protector too, but a mom pulls in and is a comfort. The dad is a provider protector, pushes out for ownership. So we have now a big society of boys who don't have dads, who are pushing them out, disconnecting them from the woman so that they can be their own man. That's why we have a 24-year-old in that podcast, a 24-year-old boy whose mommy's calling because mommy's that comfort. I don't want you yelled at my son because you hurt his feelings. Well, he was 3 hours late. Lucky he didn't get fired. Because if that was me, I was like, dude, I just would have fired him.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, see ya, get out. And it's like, where's the ownership? The mom, and again, we talked before about the happy kid phenomena. And this is something I haven't talked about. This is something I'm getting into as an educator, as a parent, as a man. I see this all around. The happy kid phenomena is what that parent did, is say, hey, I want my kid to be happy. I don't want him to go through any struggle. I don't want him to feel any pain. I don't want him to have to do any of this stuff. So what happens is you have a mom of a 24-year-old boy. So the mom didn't make a man, the mom made a boy, because the mommy's doing the work for him. The mommy's trying to say, oh, well, Johnny had a hard night last night. Johnny went this, this and this. You're making excuses for him not to take ownership. You're taking that boy's power away from him, for him to say, no, I was late. This is my fault. This is my responsibility. And then to be able to change the action. So when mom steps in because they didn't want their kid to be yelled at or to hurt or to feel pain or to struggle or any of those things, you're stepping in and you're ripping away the opportunity for this kid to take ownership, to think critically, and basically it goes back to take ownership of themselves. You're taking that away and you're taking the ownership, which gives them an excuse to say, well, like that's, so anyways.
Great answer.
I could go on for that forever.
Oh, of course you're very good at expressing your thought process, and again, mentioned it earlier, telling stories. So I so appreciate that. I got the last thing I'm going to ask you, and we're going to close up here, is Clay, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Man, just don't make it an option. Just never give up, and I think that's one of the things I saw my dad do. I saw my mom do too. They took ownership of themselves. One of the things, they went after their life because it's theirs. And I think when we start taking ownership of our own lives, that's when it gives us the opportunity to always get back up. Like you said, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I think we give ourselves an out. I hear lots of times, well, I tried. Well, trying is an excuse for you to fail. That's, to me,
trying is lying. That's what I've told people for 30 years.
Yeah. Well, I tried.
The word try, it's lie, right?
Well,
you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
You didn't it's try. There's no in between either. There's no maybe. It's either yes or no.
Yeah.
Quit telling yourself and giving yourself an excuse to flow either way.
Yep.
Right. It's what we tell ourselves. So,
and I think that goes into that like give a trophy because you showed up mentality. Like that was the absolute ruining of sports. Like I remember
it is.
That came in that
Here's your participation award because your team sucked or you sucked as an individual.
Yeah.
What is that teaching us? And it's
nothing.
Prevalent. I've gone to gone to different conferences, and speakers are up bragging about the fact that they bought the whole soccer team trophies because they lost. What do you
lost? What do you,
yeah. You know what?
That's part of the happy
win or lose
phenomena.
Yeah. Win or lose. Get your ass in gear and figure out how to be better. And if you're on our team that never wins, you can still win. You can still be a vital part of that team and be a champion every single day. I used to have those conversations with my kid. Yes, your team loses all the time, but you're not. You're out there. You're hustling. You're listening to the coach. You're engaged in practice. You're engaged in the game. You leave with a good attitude. You're sad because you lost, but you understand that what you just accomplished in that game is going to continue to level up to the next game and the next game. And next year's team, you might be better. But today, you can't change it, 20 some kids playing soccer or, people on the ball diamond or hockey or whatever the case may be. We just need to stop enabling.
Oh yeah. I wrote this down. I wrote this down here and I'll kind of leave off with this is everyone wants to be a champ without doing the work.
Yeah.
You can't be a champion unless you put the work in for it. So here's what I'm going to tell everybody is every single day, realize and find out who you are. When you know exactly who you are, just like I said at the beginning, and I don't know if I said it on the podcast before we were talking, is like, I wake up every day and I have no clue how I would not live my life to the fullest today because I know exactly why I'm here on this earth. I know my purpose. Love myself, love my story, live with purpose. And if I just don't know how not to do that. It's to me, it's unfathomable, but I want every single person to know that. So go out there, do the work, go deep, stop staying on the surface, get deep, go those layers, reveal who you are, know that, and then you can wake up every single day excited about your life and just leave it on the field.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the things that I will finish that off with is when you share your circumstances with somebody that you know, like, and trust, that is going to
Mhm.
tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to
Yeah.
hear. It's going to be easier for you to discover yourself and to call yourself out in your own bullshit. Because I've had people say to me, and this is going to sound funny, some of the listeners know this already. Um, People will say, "What would Dwight do in that circumstance?"
Mhm.
After I start working with them as just friends, even
Yeah.
they'll think to me. I had somebody here, honestly, in the last couple of weeks say, every time I'm thinking this, I'll think to myself, what would Dwight say to me? What would
That's
Dwight do?
awesome.
And at first I used to think, well, you don't need to do that, but actually it's very powerful.
Mhm.
It's very powerful when somebody that you know, like, and trust has gotten to
Yeah.
influence your mindset to stop you thinking that negative stuff, to help you
Yep.
stop camping, even if it's for one moment. Right now you're camping. I'm going to teach you a moment from now is the future, and you need to climb out of that minute of what you're feeling, of
Mhm.
whatever negativity it is, right? So anyway, it's been an amazing conversation. Our time is up. I want to respect our listeners and your time. However, before we end, can you please tell the listeners what's the best way to reach you?
For me, Facebook, Clay Smeltzer, or we have our Facebook group, Purpose Infused Men's Facebook group. I'm also on LinkedIn, Clay Smeltzer, and I'm also on Instagram, Clay Smeltzer. And then you can always visit the site at Purpose Infused Coaching at, Purpose Infused Coaching.kajabi.com.
Okay, I'll make sure that's all in the show notes as well. This episode will actually go, I've decided before we even finished, it's going to go live next week. So I will make sure that's in the show notes, how they can connect you. So thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Clay. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it's never too late to give a heck. Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.